Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about the relationship between telework and creativity.
How many times have you heard about the many virtues of brainstorming? An unbridled source of creativity, like the primordial soup that gave rise to all life on Earth.
And how many times have you heard that teleworking undermines this type of interaction? Is it really that simple though? Are remote working and creativity necessarily incompatible? What's the story?
The first common misconception is that creativity depends on a commingling of ideas, bouncing off one another through exchange and interaction. Creativity can blossom under these conditions, but not only.
As the former head of HR at Google argued, teleworking doesn't promote creativity. We try to limit distance because it's incompatible with our culture.
There are two elements I'd like to point out here. First, this statement seems to assume we're talking about full-time remote working, because an employee working 2 or 3 days from home would still have plenty of interactions in the office. So there's no reason the distance would impede creativity.
But for the second point, let's go ahead and imagine full-time remote work. Why would that completely abolish all interactions? Wouldn't there be tools for remote interactions?
This sort of affirmation describes the cultural norms that structure the relationship between the individual and the group, and the implicit fear that physical distance somehow separates the individual from the group and the group culture.
Moreover, why should we believe that creativity is dependent on the group and its culture? The creative process is more complex than that.
A group can foster creativity, but on the other hand, its norms and rituals can also amount to censorship. Conformism and self-satisfaction don't tend to support creativity.
Creativity is born of frustration, or so the proverb claims, but maybe time also fosters creativity.
Sure, in those solitary moments when all of your energy is focused on a limitless journey, when your ideas can jump like a boat from wave to wave, when no taboos are there to restrain them, no eyes to judge them.
So, while frustration, emulation, and confrontation can all foster creativity, sometimes it blossoms thanks to freedom, solitude, and contemplation.
It's important to accept the fact that creativity cannot be reproduced on an industrial scale. Try as we might to model it, creativity escapes managerial ideology. The idea that teleworking undermines creativity is as absurd as the 1990s notion that open spaces would favor cooperation.
Creativity is protean and paradoxical, as uncertain as life itself. The urgency of a situation occasionally makes creativity more apparent, when it pulls back and fires like a bow and arrow. But in the company of contemplation and boredom, creativity is more like a refreshing stream that's always flowing.
Creativity feeds off bridges, other ideas and ricochets, but sometimes it also requires precision, depth, and the acuity of specialization. Creativity can be honed through mastery of a single field, but interdisciplinarity also provides a solid foundation and broadens horizons.
In all honesty, you have to have been in the trenches with the creative process, its pitfalls, labyrinths, doubts, and suffering, as well as joys and illuminations, to understand the humility it imposes. Creativity cannot be put into a tidy little box.
To create the conditions for creativity, you have to accept its paradoxes, that there is no model. That's a key first step. Maybe that's why some companies have at times muzzled creative minds without completely eradicating creativity itself.
Now that management theory needs creativity in our changing world, it's become an object of desire, coveted for the power it bestows. So, we try to build models for creativity. Now we're suffocating creativity itself.
Teleworking can foster creativity or hinder it depending on how it's done. The subject demands in-depth thinking on a wide variety of themes such as work itself, the relationship between individuals and groups, freedom and control, and so on.
To recap, creativity is a complex, protean process that we cannot truly model. Suggesting that remote working impedes creativity effectively amounts to reducing telework to working in a bubble without any interaction, and reducing creativity to just one of its aspects. Telework and creativity are absolutely not incompatible. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.